everybody, and welcome to Macro Talk. It is Tuesday, February the 10th, 2026, and tonight we are talking about lighting. But let me explain that briefly, if I may. The idea was initially, when I had this thought, I was going to talk about answering a question of one of my viewers. I was going to answer the question of how do you transition from the studio to the field. Seemed like a great question, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought that there are probably more people thinking about getting into the studio at some point. So I thought what I'd do was break this up into some important topics that should be of interest to any macro photographer, and then talk about the transition in both directions, because they're different things you need to think about. So if you're a predominantly field guy thinking about doing some stuff indoors, you'll find some stuff of interest in this. And if you're the opposite, well, that's what the question we're answering. So now, there are a couple of assumptions that I'm making. Now, one thing that you could do if you're moving from the studio to the field, if you're trying to get field experience, you could just take all your studio gear and all your studio knowledge into the field. People do that, believe it or not. They drive out into a field with all of their equipment and set up basically a studio in the field. That is absolutely not what I'm talking about. That is not the kind of situation that I would recommend. Instead, I'm going to assume that those people who want to expand their experience into field macro are interested mainly in doing it for the pleasure and the interest rather than moving their house out there. So the primary goal, I'm assuming, is to take great pictures and to take as little equipment as possible out into the field with you. And that's going to be my assumption throughout this series. Just as I'm assuming if you're trying to break into high magnification macro in the studio, that you don't want to mortgage your home to do so, that you don't want to build an entire photography lab. Now, if it is your intention to build an entire lab, please call me about private lessons, and I'd be happy to help you with that. Okay, this week we're talking about lighting. So we're talking about lighting from the perspective of an experienced studio macro photographer who wants to experience the outside world. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about the opposite, the person who's only been doing field stuff but wants to get into the studio. What lighting considerations should both of these people think about? And it's really interesting how much difference there is in those two directions. But we'll cover both of those, and it's going to be important, I think, to anybody who takes macro pictures, which I'm assuming is everybody who's here. I'll cover the events for the rest of this week after we get through with this, and I'm going to try to get through by 50 minutes, which would be, 8:50, so that I have time to say hi to everybody, because I don't want to do that at the beginning, so I don't run out of time. So let us begin. We're talking then about the prospect of taking your experience, everything you've learned in the studio, and going out and taking good pictures in the field. Now, we're going to talk about the equipment in a separate session. That's a whole thing of itself. We'll talk about cameras, we'll touch on lighting again, but tonight I want to talk about the whole philosophy of lighting, how we deal with the environment that we find ourselves in, and how different it is to go outside if you've been basically in your studio for your whole life. So it's important to understand that there are differences in the way lighting is approached. In the studio, it's all about predictability and precision. It's all about knowing exactly what your lights are going to do, and using precisely the right kind of light, number of lights, direction of light, diffusion. And after a while, you get really used to doing that. And you realize that you've got a whole system, a whole world basically around your subject, and you can light it any way you want. And the more you do it, the more creative you get with your lighting. But the thing to remember is that when you're in the studio, basically every photon that is bouncing off that subject and going into your camera is one that you put there. You deliberately put it there. However, in the field, it's all about movement. It's all about capturing movement of the subject, making compromises all the time for illumination and movement and blur and that type of thing. You're constantly on the lookout for opportunities. So it's a very dynamic process, and it's totally different than what you do in the studio. You have moments to make decisions in the field, whereas you can take all day to make a decision in the studio within reason. So field lighting is no less sophisticated than what we're doing in the studio. It really isn't. It involves all the same concepts, but it's really more of a time compressed experience. You have very little time to do it, and the lighting that we choose to use is pretty tolerant of failure, and that's going to be important. There is very little wiggle room in the studio. If you have complete control over the light, it is expected that you're going to use that light to maximum effect, and that's the standard we kind of hold ourselves to. In the field, it's understood that you're not going to find that every time, and it is therefore a type of lighting that lets you get away with some stuff. But let's first of all recognize that somebody who's going from the studio to the field already knows about the quality of light, what the different temperatures of light mean. They understand directionality, and that's very, very important. Where is the light coming from? They understand the concept of specularity, of highlights coming from particular reflections on a shiny critter's surface. They understand how to separate background and foreground using the equipment that they have. So they're coming into this with a lot of the same concepts that we're going to be using, but what changes is where and how the decisions are made. And that is really going to be the key. The equipment that you're going to use for creating light is really no different than what you should be using in the studio. Now, I'm assuming that you are not using large studio lights, which are notoriously bad for studio macro. I'm assuming that if you're using a flash, you're using compact flashes, xenon flashes, and some type of a controller. You have multiple of them and they're of the same type. Or you're using larger speed lights, that's fine too. Or you're using continuous light, either using small LED panels or individual LED lights. Now, the panels may transfer outdoors, but the individual LED lights will not realistically. So there are definitely some equipment things that will come into this. But mostly we're going to be talking about technique of how we use the light that we find when we're out in the field. And there are constraints and opportunities as well. There are things that you can do in the studio, obviously, that you cannot do in the field, not realistically. Likewise, there are things you can do in the field that you can't realistically do in the studio. Knowing what they are will help you expand your portfolio because you'll be able to do more stuff than you could before. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And the difference between then the working in the studio, where basically our light is fixed, we put it in position and our light is fixed, and we move our subject around in that light. That's one of the ways that we do it, but it's about iteration or iterative refinement. What we do is we add a light, we see the effect, we maybe take a test picture, then we add another light, and then we build on that, and we try to only change one variable at a time. Very precise, very formulaic. In the field, the subject is ephemeral. It's the light that adapts. and we have to know how to adapt the light that we find out there to take advantage. And we have to be right the first time. Most of the time, you don't get a lot of second chances in macro. You'll see the dragonfly, and you have to know exactly what you're going to do with that light as you're bringing your camera up. You're setting that up and taking the shot, and that dragonfly's gone. And that's going to be the way it is in the field. It is a completely different mindset. In the studio, you can take minutes to set up a single light, tens of minutes. You could take hours if you wanted to have one light perfect before you added the second. In the field, you have seconds to make these decisions. Which lights are going to be on, which are off. Your lighting in the field needs to be robust enough to get enough photons on the subject to get the shot. You can fix it later if you have to, but it doesn't have to be perfect. If you take that mindset of perfection out into the field, first of all, you'll never take a picture. And second of all, it won't be perfect if you do. We've talked before about stability, and that's important when we're talking about lighting. You depending on the robustness of your lighting in the field, that will determine how stable your platform needs to be. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about equipment. But things like tripods and clamps and articulated arms, that's the stuff that largely is going to be in the studio. You can take some of that outdoors, but you probably don't want to. In the field, it's mostly going to be handheld, braced, or semi-supported, and you need to be able to tolerate motion and framing drift with your lighting as well. So your lighting needs to have large enough coverage to make up for any movement that happens as you're stabilizing yourself. Something else that doesn't even cross the mind of a studio macro photographer is the environment that you're in and the variables that introduces. The wind. How does the wind change light? Well, it moves trees and branches over your subject and causes moving dapples to complicate things. The sun angle changes continuously, in case you hadn't noticed. It goes over the sky like that. And while that's a longer scale change, it's happening continuously, and you need to be aware of it. Some foliage, especially succulents, are highly reflective. Did you know that? A lot of light will bounce off them, and they'll contaminate an area that you thought was pretty stable as far as lighting goes. And there are insects with opinions that will ruin your plans as well. Insects that are sitting there nice and pretty and ready to be photographed, and then decide to start cleaning themselves or flapping their wings or doing what insects do. So being flexible enough to get your picture between events with an insect with other plans is part of it, and that is part of the lighting too. So really, the best thing to do is to recognize that of all of your lighting options, unless you are a specialist, let's say you're a fungus photographer. That's all you photograph is fungi. They don't move. Most fungi that I'm aware of don't fly, and they're going to be found mostly in darker places. So sure, if you are photographing just fungi, there will probably be a strong argument for using continuous light in the field. But I'm going to assume that we're talking about folks who want to photograph things that move, insects and arachnids in nature, which are moving. If that is true, I think the gold standard remains flash. That there are so many more things that you can do with the right flash setup that you can do with continuous light, unless you are going to carry a car battery around your waist and have a very powerful light. So we're going to assume for the minute that the best choice for field macro lighting is the flash. and it dominates the options because flash allows you to freeze that motion. If you do have a walking insect, you can absolutely freeze that thing with your flash. Your exposure with flash, providing your settings in the camera are such that ambient light is not part of the formula, is determined by your flash duration, and your flash duration is determined by the flash power. We're going to get to that, but you can use your flash in the field to absolutely stop motion. And that is one of the most critical things you have to do in field macro that is not an issue really in the lab or in the studio. Unless you have issues with vibration, you shouldn't have motion that you have to freeze. And the other thing that that flash does, it overpowers ambient light. Now we're going to talk all about how you balance ambient light with your chosen light, because that's super important. It's one of the most important concepts you have to get. But it decouples exposure from the background brightness so that you can adjust and manage the foreground brightness, the brightness of your subject, without essentially doing anything to the background. Or if you choose, doing a lot to the background. And we'll talk about that in just a second. There are lots of dedicated macro flashes out there, and I have many of them. These are, for example, ring lights that contain 1 or 2 flash tubes so that you have a flash on either side of your lens. Other options include miniature miniature flashes that fit on the hot shoe of your camera. Even the pop-up hot shoe on your camera could be considered one of these lights. Now, dedicated macro lights are things like ring lights and the ring flashes, and also the flashes that you can get that have articulating arms. My MF12s, when they're mounted to the camera, to the ring on the camera, they would be considered a dedicated macro flash. More sophisticated than the fixed ring flash, but still largely a ring flash. I would urge you to think about these devices as useful and as learning tools or experience tools. You will not want to use them for the rest of your outdoor career. They have problems. They can cause some very characteristic catch lights in insect eyes that are, in some folks' opinions, that they ruin the picture. I happen to like them, but a lot of people don't. So oftentimes using a non-diffused ring flash or a multi-flash setup on your mounted to your lens is a good tool to have, and it can be useful in a lot of situations. But you will probably want to move on to something that gives you off-camera diffused light, because that is going to be what gives you the best pictures. Now, the pros of having a ring light on your camera that you control from a controller mounted to the hot shoe is that they're usually dead simple. They usually have fantastic through the lens metering so that they can adjust themselves for the shot even at macro range, which is nice. The problem is the light, even when they're separated to either side of the lens, can be very flat. Because the light is very close, it's very bright, it's very poorly diffused, and it will often lead to a very limited ability to shape the shot like you would be able to have if your camera was separate from the flash. So small speed lights are probably the core to lighting, and not just small to medium sized speed lights, the kind that may or may not be on your camera. They may be handheld, and we're going to talk about triggers in a minute. But the actual speed light usually is a little bigger, has a larger power capacity, shorter recycle times at very low powers, which is what you want. And certainly the TTL function That's a through the lens metering where the camera figures out how much flash you need. It is very hit and miss in flash. There are some TTL equipped devices that are really good with larger scale scenes, but do not cut the mustard with macro. And then there is the macro ring light, the what is it, the R1C1 setup that has the best TTL I have ever used at macro ranges. So these are both considerations. When I'm using flash in the field, I'm usually using it manually. It's just been my preference, and it's just more flexible, and it only takes me seconds to change. But you'll learn if you do outdoor macro with flash that there are going to be power settings at distances for your camera and your setup with your camera settings that are preferable for you. And I'm not going to go into those now because they're different for everybody. Once you get them figured out, you'll very quickly be able to change between scenarios to get the lighting that you're looking for. Now, in order to use off-camera flash or multiple flashes on camera, you really need a triggering system. Now, I think most macro photographers have something like a couple of speed lights or a couple of mini speed lights like the MF12s that are going to be operated or run from a single controller on your hot shoe. And that is really the way to go. But there are different there are different controllers that do different things. And you'll be aware of radio controllers like the Godox ones that I use, and optical triggers that use a different technology altogether. And in the field, it's really important that you have the right kind of trigger, because the optical triggers, which are usually a little bit cheaper than the radio ones, or they used to be, are made for use in a studio where you control the light. They emit a flash of light, the triggers do, and the remote flashes sense that pulse with a photo sensor and fire the flash. Now, in the studio where your lighting is controlled, you have short distances to work with and reflective walls and predictable angles. It works fantastic. The optical trigger is the way to go if you have the choice. But it struggles outdoors because with an optical trigger you require line of sight. You have to have an uninterrupted zone from your trigger to your flash. Otherwise, the flash won't see your trigger go off because there's nothing for it to bounce off because you're outside. So sunlight can also trigger the flash, or it can at least interfere with it being able to sense your trigger flash. So vegetation, leaves, wherever you happen to be close to the ground. Bushes will get in the way. Just about anything. Your own diffuser can block the sensor from seeing the light. So optical is a dangerous way to go in the field, and the tiniest interference with that optical beam can ruin a shot. So I prefer radio triggering in the field. It's any modern RF system uses this, and a radio controller on the hot shoe sends a radio signal directly to the flash, and the receivers in each flash respond by flashing. That's what they're supposed to do. It's great outdoors because you don't need to have line of sight. You can have it on the other side of a tree and it'll still go off. It works through diffusers, through foliage, through shrubs, through your hands, through anything. It's immune to whatever's going on with the ambient light. It doesn't care about it, doesn't respond to it. And it is also good at short macro distances, whereas the light may be less so. So it's really the best thing to do. Get a radio trigger if you don't have one, and get the flashes that are matched to that. The combination of bright sunshine and optical triggers is worth mentioning, because I think most people know that that's a problem, but are not exactly sure why. It's because the sensor in the flash is already fully saturated or nearly saturated by the sunlight. So the impact of another bit of light, if you will, doesn't make much difference, and the flash doesn't realize it's just been prodded because it's already full up with light. Does that make sense? The trigger impulse will be lost in all that background light. So just don't use optical triggers and you'll be fine. And yeah, so other outdoor complications with light. There are all kinds of different lighting scenarios that you run into outside that you would never run into inside. Sun angle is one of them. The movement of the sun constantly changes. If you are focused on one particular area, say you're photographing an ant hill, the problem times are not when the sun comes up and when the sun goes down, but in that 12 hours in between as the sun is moving. It is going to change everything about your shots. So being aware of where you are in relation to the moving sun is really important. And also avoiding specularity is one of the key determinants of that is going to be where you are in relation to the light. So I think we've beaten to death the whole idea of triggers. I would say one thing, that latency, which can be an issue in some settings in the studio, really is not an issue in the field ever. It's mainly because of the discrepancy between your shutter release time and the duration of the flash. It's the milliseconds that it takes for the trigger to fire the flashes. It really doesn't figure into anything that we're doing, because the motion is being frozen by the flash, and whenever the flash happens, it is such a short duration in terms of how long the shutter is open that it doesn't really make any difference. So don't worry about it, really. If somebody says, oh, but that has a lot of latency, just forget about it. It doesn't matter. All right, so let's talk then about high-speed sync, because this one is misunderstood. We don't use high-speed sync in the studio either, but I mention it because a lot of people will be aware of high-speed sync and think that is definitely one of the things that you should be using for macro photography. It is exquisitely inappropriate for most macro settings. There are a couple of legitimate reasons to use high-speed sync, but they're far and few between, and I'll explain them in a minute. So in normal flash synchronization, the shutter opens up, the flash fires, and motion is frozen by that flash. So your shutter goes up, flash, and during that flash, the image is captured. That's it. In high-speed sync, the shutter doesn't open. The shutter opens a little bit and a slit moves up and down across the sensor, during which time the flash emits a rapid pulse of flashes. Lots and lots of flashes as that slit is traveling up and down. So motion is now governed more by the shutter speed, the motion of the shutter, than it is by the flash. And the reason we use flash is partly to freeze all that action. So you're no longer able to freeze it. What is going to determine whether or not there is blur during that HSS firing is how long was the shutter open in relation to how far the insect had moved its appendage. And that basically explains the whole reason you wouldn't want to use it. So you don't have the motion freezing action of a low power. And understand that with modern flashes, the lower the power, the shorter the duration of the flash. I should have mentioned that earlier, but that's very, very key. So you are then, when you're doing regular flash photography in the field, you are relying on extremely short, like 1/20,000th of a second exposure times from your flash. And that is exactly what you want. Flash durations are far, far shorter than mechanical shutter speeds ever could be. So in high speed sync then, the flash duration becomes long because it's popping off multiple times. It can be up to several milliseconds. And the motion blur from the wind or from insects moving or from the photographer shaking will all add to the blurriness. So HSS basically undoes the biggest advantages to flash that we have as macro photographers, and that's that short duration. You also use, I beg your pardon, lose a massive amount of power when you use HSS. It's something like between 2 and 4 stops of illumination are lost by this rapidly pulsing flash. So, in macro, we're already struggling with light, and losing 4 stops of light is a deal breaker. So add on top of that your diffuser, and all of a sudden you might as well be doing your shot in the dark. You'd have to use higher ISO, wider apertures, longer trains of the flash pulse, and you'll get more blur. So it's a cascade, not really a trade-off. It's just a bad idea. So how about we just say don't use HSS ever in flash and you'll be fine. Is there ever a time it's useful? Yeah, maybe. To balance very bright sunlight during the middle of the day when you have a very shallow depth of field. So if you have a large, bright sky, and you've got everything's pale, everything's reflective, and the sun's blazing down, and you want to preserve some background detail in the scene, and you need to exceed your normal sync speed of 1/200th of a second, 1/250th if you're Nikon. HSS would allow you to use a faster shutter speed so that you could tame the ambient light. You could calm it down because it's so bright, and you could use a faster shutter speed to minimize that and get some detail in the background. Fair enough. But you lose your motion freezing because of the fact that now you're going to have to, the shutter is going to be open. The effective shutter speed will be way slower than if you were just using the flash as the illumination. So it works best if your subjects are not moving. Mushrooms tend not to move too much. If you're doing your photography at lower magnifications, and if you're very close, if your flash is very close to the subject. So there are rare instances when it might work. I've maybe used HSS once every 2 years when I can't find another way to get the shot. So, and that's just hardly worth talking about. HSS can be used if you're into mixed light aesthetics. If you like having flash and incandescent light in the same scene, it's one way of doing it to preserve the natural background brightness is to use HSS, but it's another rarity. It's unlikely you'll ever want to do it. So it's almost never the right tool because insects move. It's always blowy with wind outside. You're usually at higher magnification than 1:1. You're already maxed out on the power of your flash, and you're using heavy diffusion. So for all those reasons, it's not a good choice. So should we forget about it? I think we should. Okay. Now, what I want to talk about now is the techniques from the studio that survive the move to outdoors. Probably the most important one is the first thing I teach in studio or field lighting is one light at a time. Now, it's different because in the studio, I may start with one light and end up with 5. But I start with one, my key light. In the field, the philosophy should be the same. Your thought process should be the same. I'm going to start with one light. Now, in the field, that's probably the only light you'll use. So you set it up as you would set up your key light. And the difference here is that you're going to, in the studio, you're going to set up your key light, then you will use a fill light or a hair light or a backlight or some other kind of light to add the accents that you want to bring out the details. We don't do that in the field because usually we don't have time. We don't have the lights. It's a very complicated process, and we don't have the time because the insect's getting ready to leave. So we use one light as the key, and we set that up at the beginning of our outdoor session, and we use the ambient light as our fill, as our accent lights for everything else. And that is a very different approach than in the studio, but it all starts with one light. Multi-light setups in the field are unusual. There is an exception to that rule, and that is when I'm outside with my MF12s, which can be angled and moved around a ring around the end of my lens. I will frequently shoot with 3 or 4 lights. And that is not unusual. It's not unusual to see people with that lighting system to use that. I can position the light left, right, up, down, below. I can diffuse it, and I can change the angle that the light is coming in from. So I will often use multi-light setups, but it's probably not the best way to do it, to be honest. It's very fidgety, and you can ruin a shot with too many lights and too many settings to juggle. Most people who do flash photography outdoors have figured out an effective way to do it with one light. And oftentimes the effective part that allows them to do it with one light is their choice of diffuser. And we will be talking about that. But if you just think as you're starting out that you're going to stick with one light and save any fancy multi-light stuff for another day, you'll be happier. Just treat the flash that you have as your key light, and the environment becomes your fill. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use bounce cards, which we'll talk about in a minute, but probably the most important thing to remember about flash in the field, as opposed to in the studio, is distance. Flash to subject distance is the control variable that you are going to be using. It's not the power of the flash. That should not be your first thought. It should be, how far from your subject is your flash? So tiny differences in the distance between your flash and the subject will make huge differences in the amount of light that gets to your subject. And that is what we take advantage of, the inverse square law, when we use off-camera single light flash in the field. Now, typically for macro, what I recommend is that you use a fairly low ISO. Around your native ISO is fine. A small aperture, small in quotation marks, because I don't mean nothing anywhere close to diffraction territory. So by small aperture, I mean f8, something like that. And your exposure is dominated by your flash. That's going to determine the light on your subject. Your ambient light, and there is always ambient light if you're out in nature, unless you're shooting at night. There is always ambient light, and that becomes your background tone for the photograph, as well as your rim light, any light that's being bounced forward, and also the context for the color in the frame. So we'll get back to that in a minute, because the whole idea of exposure, ambient light as background light and your flash as your key light, is so important, and there are some concepts we need to cover in just a minute. But I do want to talk first about motion. It is your flash duration that is going to determine how effectively you control motion, all the way up to photographing a flying dragonfly and freezing it in mid-flight. That is going to be determined by your flash duration, and your shutter speed matters considerably less than that when you're using flash. In fact, it matters almost not at all when you're using flash. And as I mentioned earlier, high-speed sync just hurts most of the time, so don't bother with it. Now, before we go any further, let me talk about the probably the biggest creative problem that people new to field macro struggle with, and that is using flash and having dark backgrounds on every photograph. Now, when you're photographing insects on foliage outdoors in nature, and or when you're looking at those photographs anyway, you're not expecting to see what looks like darkness all around, like you're out there shooting these things at night. The eye is looking for background, it's looking for context. Why is it then that when we go outside with our camera and our flash and a nice expensive diffuser, why are we taking pictures that show the subject, the foreground, well lit, and the background as if it's midnight? And while that may be a good look in some pictures, it is relatively rare that it is. It's usually pretty off-putting. Now, in the studio, what do? Well, you just go, you grab another bendy arm light and shine it on a piece of colored card behind the subject. Grab two. You want more light? Grab two of them. We control every photon of light. So even though the inverse square law says that our flashes are going to hit the subject and they're going to be, that light's going to be so spread out by the time it gets to the background, we won't see any of it. Fair enough. Add a light to the background. Now, you could do that in the field if you wanted to, and if you had the lights, and if you had the people to hold them, or the equipment to stick them in the ground, that type of thing. But usually you don't. So usually when we're outdoors in nature photographing things with a flash, we are thinking about the flash lighting the subject and the background being lit by the ambient light. And that is so very important, because there are a couple of things that we do when we're taking pictures of subjects with a flash in the field that are counterintuitive, that you probably wouldn't think of right off the bat. And one of those is to move the light source back in order to lighten the blackness of the background. Doesn't make sense that by moving the light back, you're allowing the background to become better lit. But you are, because the problem here is, or the issue in question is the ratio between the distance from your light to the subject and from your subject to the background. The thing is, the background is being lit by the ambient light. It's just we overpower it with the flash. By moving the flash back and then doing a couple of other things with our camera, like opening the aperture a little bit, just a little bit, and maybe bumping the ISO a little bit, what will happen is we will brighten again both the foreground and the background, because the background illumination is controlled by the aperture size and the ISO of your camera. The foreground, the lighting on the subject, is controlled by the flash and the distance between the flash and the subject. So this is so important. It's called fall off, is how we describe it, but it should become very quickly second nature to you, that if your foreground is bright and well lit and everything else is black, you need to back off not on the power of the flash, on the distance between the flash and the subject. That's so important, such a key concept in doing good outdoor macro, because part of doing good outdoor macro is knowing what your background is, being aware of your surroundings so that you can create a photograph that has a pleasing background as well as an interesting and meaningful foreground. So there are other things. That's enough on that, I think. We'll cover it again when we talk from the other side of coming in from the field, because this is not something you would do in the studio. Let's talk about challenges that are unique to the field, the environment. it's almost always unstable, whereas at least in the studio, it's not. It's pretty reliable. Wind is going to get you every time. It messes with everything. It moves stuff. It causes vibration in cameras and tripods as well as subjects. You just have to learn how to read the wind. If you're out on a windy day, you'll notice that wind comes in gusts, and they seem to be pretty well timed, and you can predict when you're going to get a break. Sometimes, not always, but when you do, you need to be ready for it. And you can use your body, the way you put your body, as a windbreak. If you've never thought about that, do it all the time, as well as climbing in a bush. That will do it as well. Don't forget that when you're in a studio and your beetle from Bic Bugs is on a pin, and basically he's not doing anything, he's just sitting on the pin waiting all day for you to take the picture, no problem. The subjects in nature don't do that. They pretty much always move, and when they see you, they move faster than they normally would to get away, because they're afraid of you because you're big. And they don't sign model releases, so you can't boss them around. They just have to do their own thing. We have to remain ethical in our practice. We cannot in some way hinder their ability to move. So basically we have to learn to anticipate movement with our lighting rather than react to it. And we don't want to do anything to manipulate the insect's ability to move. So it comes down to getting the light and the camera where the insect is probably going to be. And that takes experience. There's no other way you can do it. You just have to know that some insects walk in straight lines, others zigzag, and still others just jump and disappear. Knowing where to have your light before you need it is key to getting good photographs. There's a lot of visual noise out in nature that you don't deal with in the studio. It's often because of backgrounds that are overly busy or chaotic. You'll see these all the time, and the way you get rid of them is again using flash fall off. I mean, to obliterate part of the scene. You can do that. Mostly though, it's changing your angle, moving around the subject to where the visual noise is not overpowering. And occasionally it's okay to reposition the insect. I generally don't teach that up as a first principle, but you can if you can do it without harm. So some of the opportunities that you get in the field that you don't get in the studio are this authentic narrative that comes with taking pictures outdoors. I mean, when you take pictures outdoors, there's a story there that's provided by the ambient light and the wind and the location of the subject and the substrate you find him on. All of this adds to an authentic narrative and gives you a story. I have a whole bunch of pictures I was going to be showing during this, but I didn't want to distract from what I was saying, but I will show them. I'll probably put them in this week's article coming out tomorrow. But also you have behavior and context. Insects do. I've got a whole series of spider photographs of spiders eating things, other things that are people too, little bugs. So you get the behavior and then the context of that behavior. Natural backgrounds, natural palettes, they're lovely. It's the best possible way to shoot macro in the field is when you have these natural palettes that fit in with the environment that you're shooting. And then you've got light interacting with dew or ice or frost or translucent wings or iridescent beetles. The interaction of light with the subject or the surroundings is also something that you just don't get in the studio. Well, I guess you could. You could get that in my studio, the light interacting with the ice because it gets cold down here. But other than that, yeah, you couldn't do it in the studio. So I think that field macro is a different kind of macro for all these reasons. It's more difficult in some respects. It's more exciting in some respects. I think that the pictures can be absolutely fascinating, and they can do for you what you just would have a hard time doing if you were just trying to recreate that feeling in a studio shot. Now, that's what I do. I mean, my thing is to take photographs in the studio that are at least emblematic of what that organism would be doing in the field. I will show a couple of pictures very, very quickly. I will be as fast as I possibly can as soon as I find where preview is. There it is. So let me just share this screen with you, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Well, I can't because my there it is. My OBS just disappeared. This is so complicated. So this is just a fly. It's just a placeholder. I have all the pictures up and ready to bring over. So here is an ichneumon wasp, parasitic wasp, and you know, in the studio, I try to make that look like they just disappeared. I try to make that look like a what I think the wasp would be doing in nature, which is kind of hanging back and looking for something to lay an egg in. And that's a narrative that if I'd photographed out in nature, I wouldn't have had to pose it like that. Here's a lovely little damselfly, and all of his eating fingers around his mouth that he uses to shove other insects into his gullet. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to show, was the viciousness of the thing. There's a wasp called an Alabama hunting wasp that, yeah, need I say more? These are all my attempts to make these things look like they're doing what they do out in nature, and this thing is a scary looking wasp. I'm glad I'm not on his list of prey. Anyway, we'll talk much more about doing lighting to get an outdoor effect when we talk about this on Thursday, which is the plan on Thursday, is to talk about the modifications and changes you need to make as a field photographer coming in to the studio to do stuff at high magnification. There were more pictures than that. I don't know where they are. I'll show them on Thursday. But the whole idea of using light the same way both places just doesn't fly, doesn't wash. Totally different concepts. I think we covered everything I had to. I wanted to say hi to a few people, and I also wanted to tell you what was coming up Saturday. For those of you who are Patreon supporters, we have Pazoom at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning until noon, and I have something I've lined up for that. I can't remember what it is, but I'm sure it will be breathtakingly entertaining and educational. If you are a Patreon person, please come on Saturday. These things are always fun. Great group of people, lots and lots of stuff to learn, and interesting updates. If you're new to the Patreon group and you've only been to maybe one Pazoom before, bring some of your photographs and plan on giving us an introduction. We would love to know more about you, where you're from, what you do, your interests in photography. That always is fun, and we look forward to it. So yeah, that's coming up on Saturday. On Friday, which is the day before Saturday and happens to be out of my control, it's Friday the 13th. I didn't plan it that way, but Friday the 13th this week is going to be crystal art. So the homework from last time was to take photographs of birefringent soy sauce crystals. Did you know that soy sauce had crystals in it? No. But I do know that when you have 10 or so slides with soy sauce on them brewing away on your desk, it makes an awful smell. So there's that. But anyway, that's what we're going to be looking at on Friday. And that's with Harold Hall, and I will be doing birefringent soy sauce crystals. I can't wait to see what people have come up with. So that is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday the 13th. The invitation is available over on my website. It's on Patreon. It will be on my website tomorrow morning when the blog post is published. It's written. I just got to add the photographs and post it. Somebody asked me about the equipment, the second light experiment that we're doing, the equipment donation thing. I have not had enough time to work on the website to set that up yet. It's coming. I'm working on it. Not enough time in the day to do all of this stuff. Yeah, that's everything. Let me say hi. I know that Amy is here and Alistair's here. Hi, guys, and thank you for all you do. The AK diffuser pops up again when David mentions it. Yep, lovely, lovely thing. That's one of the ways that you can do it. I never mentioned, by the way, diffusion. Multi-layer diffusion is very, very difficult outdoors. And I have built multiple devices to give me multiple layers of diffusion. And they all become a bit unwieldy and bulky. The reason that the AK diffuser works so well it takes advantages of two principles of diffusion. One of them is scatter from reflection. It has a reflective surface inside the diffuser, and then that diffused light passes through a second diffuser to the subject. So those types of devices, even though they are mounted on camera, which is the last place you really want the light to be coming from, because of the shape of the thing, the light actually comes from a much broader apparent source. So yeah, there's that. My homemade diffusers, I've got every kind under the sun that I've made. They work some of the time. Sometimes they don't. They're very dependent on situations. But the key thing is that your light be diffused. If you use undiffused light, you're going to have ugly, flat, reflective looking subjects. There you go. Let me see. Some insects and spiders love their reflections in your lens and will stare at it. Indeed, they will. Absolutely. But I wouldn't count on it. I wouldn't get too close to see if that's the case. We'll talk more when we talk about techniques. Some of the techniques I use in the field are based on that fact that some insects and some arachnids do like their reflection, and you can use that to your advantage. But yeah, it's pretty good idea. Let me see who else is here. I said hi to David and oh dear, Shatanya, would that be right? I hope that's right. Yep, I'm guessing though. Not good at names from other places. John is here. John Crooks, welcome. Robert, Klaus, all my friends are here tonight. Julie is here. Wonderful to see you, Julie. Reef Moonshiners, greetings. Andre, Mike Broderick, welcome. And who am I forgetting? Rod Muir, who bought himself a Cygnus Tech diffuser a while ago and still want to use it. Yep, seems like a clever setup, very lightweight. It looks a lot like the AK, I thought, but very nice. Let us know how that goes, by the way. Be very interested to hear. I think David thinks they're equally good. And yeah, I think that's everybody. Arthur, sorry Arthur, I almost didn't say hi. And we're out of time, because when Arthur waves goodbye, it means you're done, your time's up. Well, that's everything for folks who are thinking of leaving the studio and going to the field. On Thursday, we're going to talk about the differences, the subtle differences sometimes, and some of the striking ones that a field photographer going to the studio would need to think about. And we'll be talking about lighting equipment, and what it all means. So thanks for coming, everybody. I do appreciate you, and those of you who have asked, I am glad to say that my sinus thing appears to have largely cleared up, and that's good for you, because you don't have to listen to me blow my nose. And I will see you on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, or all three, depending on your wishes. So thanks for coming. Have a great rest of the day, and I will see you again soon. Good night, all.